Ellie had always hated the basement of her grandparents' house. It was dark, damp, and full of old junk that made weird noises. She avoided going down there as much as possible, but sometimes her grandmother would ask her to fetch something from the shelves or the freezer. One day, when Ellie was visiting for the weekend, her grandmother asked her to go to the basement and bring up a jar of pickles. Ellie reluctantly agreed, hoping it would be a quick trip. She grabbed a flashlight and headed to the door that led her to the stairs. As she opened the door, she felt a cold draft of air. She shivered and turned on the flashlight. She saw the wooden stairs that creaked with every step, the cobwebs that hung from the ceiling, and the dusty boxes that lined the walls. She hated it. She descended the stairs carefully, trying not to make too much noise. She reached the bottom and looked around. The basement was divided into two sections by a brick wall. On one side, there was a shelf with jars and preserves, a freezer, and a washing machine. On the other side, there was a pile of old furniture, clothes, books, and toys. Ellie knew that her grandfather used to collect antiques and junk. She wondered what secrets were hidden in that pile. She walked to the shelf and scanned the jars. She found the one labeled pickles and grabbed it. She turned to go back, but then she heard a sound. It was a faint scratching noise coming from the other side of the wall. She froze and listened. It sounded like someone or something was trying to dig through the bricks. Ellie felt a surge of fear. She wondered if there was an animal trapped in the basement or worse, a person. She wanted to run, but she was curious. She decided to take a peek. She walked to the wall and shone the flashlight over it. She saw a small hole in the bricks, about the size of a fist. She leaned closer and looked through it. She gasped. She saw a pair of eyes staring back at her. They were dark and wide, full of terror and pain. They belonged to a boy about her age. He had dirty blonde hair, pale skin, and a bloody nose. He was wearing a torn shirt and jeans. He looked like he had been beaten and starved. He was holding a metal spoon in his hand, which he was using to scrape the bricks. "Help me! Help me! Please, help me!" he whispered. Ellie was shocked. She didn't know what to do. She felt sorry for the boy, but she was also scared. She wondered who he was, how he got there, and why he was locked up. She wondered if her grandparents knew about him, or if they were the ones who put him there. She wondered if he was dangerous, or if he had a disease. She backed away from the hole and dropped the jar. It shattered on the floor, spilling pickles and vinegar. She heard a loud thud from upstairs. It was her grandmother who had heard the noise. "Ellie, what's going on? Are you okay?" she called. Ellie panicked. She didn't know what to say. She didn't want to get in trouble, but she also didn't want to leave the boy alone. She had to make a decision. She ran to the stairs and shouted, "Grandma, come quick! There's something in the basement!" She hoped she had made the right decision. Ellie's grandmother came down the stairs, followed by her grandfather, who had been napping in the living room. They saw Ellie standing by the wall, pointing at the hole. They saw the broken jar and the mess on the floor. They looked confused and angry. "What are you talking about, Ellie?" her grandmother said. "Who's in the basement?" Ellie didn't answer. She just kept pointing. Her grandparents walked to the wall and looked through the hole. They saw the boy who was still holding the spoon and looking at them with fear. They gasped. They recognized him. "Tommy? Is that you?" her grandfather said. The boy nodded. He tried to smile, but he couldn't. "Tommy, what are you doing here? How'd you get here?" her grandmother asked. The boy opened his mouth, but he couldn't speak. It was too big and thirsty. He just pointed at the spoon and the bricks. Ellie's grandparents understood. They realized what had happened. They felt a wave of guilt and sorrow. They had forgotten about Tommy. Tommy was Ellie's cousin. He was the son of her uncle Jack. Jack had been a troubled man who had a history of drug abuse and violence. He had been in and out of jail and rehab for years. He had never been a good father to Tommy, who had suffered from his neglect and abuse. One day, Jack had shown up at Ellie's grandparents' house with Tommy in tow. He had said that he was in trouble with some bad people and that he needed a place to hide. He had begged his parents to let him stay for a few days until he could sort things out. He had promised that he would take care of Tommy and that he wouldn't cause any trouble. Ellie's grandparents had agreed reluctantly. They had felt sorry for Tommy, who looked scared and hungry. They had hoped that Jack would change his way and that he would be a better father to his son. They had given them the basement to stay in since they had no spare room. They had told them to make themselves comfortable and that they would bring them food and water every day. They had told them to stay quiet and not to go outside for their own safety. They had tried to be nice, but they had also been busy. They had their own lives, their own problems, their own routines. They had forgotten about the basement and the people in it. They had forgotten about Tommy. Jack hadn't kept his promise. He hadn't taken care of Tommy or himself. He hadn't sorted things out. He had only made them worse. Jack had continued to use drugs and to contact his bad friends. He had brought them to the basement and had done things that Tommy didn't understand or want to see. He had ignored Tommy or yelled at him or hit him. He hadn't given him enough food, water, or love. He hadn't been a father. He had been a monster. One night, Jack had gone too far. He had overdosed on something and had collapsed on the floor. He had stopped breathing and his heart had stopped beating. He had died. Tommy had seen it happen. He had tried to wake him up, to call for help, to do something, but he couldn't. He was scared. He was too scared, too weak, too alone. He had cried, he had screamed, he had prayed, but no one had heard him, no one had come. He had been trapped in the basement with a dead body and no way out. He had been forgotten. Tommy hadn't given up. He had survived. He had searched the basement and had found some things that he could use. He had found a metal spoon, a flashlight, some batteries. He had found some water bottles and some crackers, some candy. He had found some books and some toys, also some clothes. Tommy had used the spoon to dig a hole in the wall, hoping to find a way out. He had used the flashlight to see in the dark and to signal for help. He had used the batteries to power the flashlight and to make sparks. He had used the water bottles to drink and to wash his wounds. He had used the crackers and the candies to eat and keep his strength. He had used the books and toys to distract himself and keep his sanity. He had been brave, he had been smart, he had been strong, he had survived. Ellie's grandparents had been shocked, they had been ashamed, they had been sorry. They had called the police and the ambulance and the fire department. They had broken down the wall and had freed Tommy. They had hugged him, kissed him, and apologized to him. They had given him food, water, and medicine. They had given him love. They had taken him to the hospital where he had been treated for his injuries and his malnutrition and his trauma. They had stayed with him and had comforted him and had supported him. They had told him that they were his family, that they loved him, that they would never forget him again. They had been grateful, they had been hopeful, they had been happy, they had saved him. Ellie had been amazed. She had been curious, she had been proud. She had learned the truth about Tommy and about her Uncle Jack and about her grandparents. She had seen the horror that Tommy had endured and the courage that he had shown. She had felt the guilt that her grandparents had felt and the love that they had given. She had talked to Tommy and had listened to his story. She had asked him questions and had answered his questions. She had shared her thoughts and her feelings and her dreams.